Okay, so good morning, distinguished participants and our colleagues in here. I'd like to announce for the meeting this coming about the issue and agenda of physical communication in Korea and the Asia Pacific region as well. So the session is organized by the Korean National Academy of Health, Life and Safety. So we call the NARS in shortly. And also some of the other professional organization institutions have joined to prepare and organize today's meeting. So, and on today's sessions, so we have three speakers. I'd like to introduce the three speakers. The first speaker is Hong Woo-hyun, the professor, Department of Economics at Donggu University. He will present the estimating the economic effect of the chemophobia in Korea. The second speaker is Chitrarakis. Sorry for such we call it is okay to call you the Miss Sachi or Chesoi in Korean name as well. The host she will make it presentation in the test. This is understanding the public risk perception of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident related radioactive waste water release. So evidence from the South Korea. So speaker is me. I am Jack Choi. I will make the presentation with the title of the global trends and the South Korea's case in safety regulation for fake news and online content. So we have two discussants as well. I will introduce two discussants later in the discuss sessions. So let me start with the introduce to Professor Hong. Let's make it.
Thanks for coming. My name is Woo Hyun Hong from Donggu University, and as Professor Choi introduced, I'm an economist. I'm not I'm kind of different person in this conference. The topic I brought today is about the estimating the economic effect of chemophobia. Basically, I look at the 2017 scientific path incident that happens in Korea. So the motivation. So in March 2017, the press announced that its scientific path contained volatility organic compounds, which is kind of harmful to human body. The key point here was that they said they found some chemical elements that possibly harmful to human body, but they never say how harmful it is. So the consumers believe that those chemical compounds is possibly harmful to human body, so they react it. So that make the kind of fear of the chemicals, and this is called the chemophobia. But it was happening. It eventually turns out that it's harmless to human body. So it was just happening. But the economic effect from this happening was kind of very significant. So this scientific incident has become the representative case of chemophobia in South Korea. But only a few studies has examined the economic effect of. I think none of the study. We have examined the economic effect of this kind of chemophobia, even though it makes have significant effect on the market. So in the economics, the chemophobia is an interesting example of the information asymmetry. I mean, the assessing the risk of the chemical requires significant expertise, but usually consumers don't have it. So there's going to be the extreme information asymmetry between the consumer and the seller, or at the consumer seller. So the consumer who are the information disadvantaged tend to react excessively to these first informations, and thereby it makes the market distortion. So in this class, in this paper, I try to consider these 2017 sanitary pad incidents as an exogenous economic shock, and examine how the economic effect of the economic effect of this sanitary pad incident on Korean the market. That's what I'm going to do today. So let me just briefly talk about the research. I mean, there are some researchers that examine the economic effect of misinformations. And for example, the Hyundai the Research Institute, it was kind of interesting. They assume that the misinformation is about 1% of the actual news articles, and they estimated the economic cost due to this misinformation. So about 30 trillion Korean won in Korea is very huge. And the second type of the researcher look at the misinformation, make the abnormal consumption patterns. So basically, they look at the case of COVID-19, and there were many people who are panic buying. Those market distortion make the huge cost. Only a few studies examine the impact of the xenophobia. They usually focus on the individual's subjective preference. These are everything I found. So only 2 papers look at the xenophobia. Slowly, they also look at the survey data, and then they found that people overestimate the risk of chemical, and need to build. Yes, how to pronounce. They also look at the collected survey data in Spain wine market. Conclude that xenophobia increased preference for consumers' goods or food without chemicals. So consumers trying to buy something organic or non-chemical food or those things. And in my paper, it's kind of different. I have the economic data, so it's real data. And the first, the contribute that we directly investigate the economic impact of xenophobia using empirical data. So basically, I built your panel data set for the company, combining the industry data from the Nielsen, and I make the farm level panel data to analyze the blend. And second, the contribution is that this is, to my best knowledge, this is the first study that investigates the economic effect of xenophobia. So the main finding is just 2 things. The first, after the sanitary pad the incident, the revenue and quantity, as the quantity of the sanitary pads under investigation was dropped sharply, but the overall the quantity of the sanitary pad did not change a lot, but their revenue increased after the incident. That's first finding. And second is that I distinguish the sanitary pad into 2 types. One is just regular, and the other is differentiated product, which is kind of such as premium or organic, natural, all those things. So I compare these 2, then the consumption of regular products did not change significantly, but the consumption of relatively expensive product, which I said the differentiated product, the increase, their quantity and revenue increased after the sanitary pad incident. So I conclude that this is kind of effect of the diversification of the consumptions. So basically, these results indicate the sanitary pad incident not only caused direct loss to the farm, the selling the investigated product, but also lead to unnecessary spending caused by these diversified consumptions. So basically, we can call this the indirect loss. So as I told you, the data. So we built a firm level panel data set of domestic Korean firms that they're selling the sanitary pad and the diaper. And basically we relate the two data. One comes from Nielsen and the other comes from core data. This data contains the annual revenue and quantity of sanitary pad and diaper by brand and firm. And this core data have financial data of all the rest firms. So I connect those two and make the firm level data. And the period I'm looking at was from 2015 to 2020, and these periods contain the period before and after the 2017 sanitary pad incident. And further, I'll listing out a sample to only major firms whose revenue is more than 1% of the total market. And this is kind of the empirical strategy which you are accustomed to. So I actually use the difference in different methods. This is stereotypes of method that analyze the policy impact in the economies. And here, basically, these methods look at the treatment group, which is sanitary pad market, and control group, which is diaper market. Basically, the difference in different methods, compare these two markets and see the effect after the sanitary pad incident. So I chose the diaper market as a control group because they are very similar to sanitary pad, but these market has no chemical issues at the time. So that's why I chose that diapers. And I'll regress these equation here. The data is a 3-to-1 effect, and the estimate the effect of the chemophobia after the sanitary pad incident. So basically, we can interpret the data. There's a change in the dependent variable, maybe the revenue or quantity after the sanitary pad incident. You can think that way. And here the dependent variable that I'm looking at was the revenue and quantity of those, the sanitary pad and diaper. And this Fi, S of Y, is the dummy variable, which is equal to 1 for sanitary pad market or 0 for diaper market. And Ti, it should be T sub T. T sub T is the dummy variable after the sanitary pad incident. So this delta is a key parameter we are looking at. And I also included some control variable, such as the size, ROA, all those things that can be explain firm's performance. And also include these two fixed effect. This one, the control for any unobserved effect that happen, the same effect across the firm. And these effects, these lambda sub t, the control for the sort of economic shock that happen at the same time. So this is the estimated model, and this is the effect. First, I look at the overall effect of sanitary pad incident. Okay? To look at this, I distinguish the product into two. One is investigated one, the other is the others. So some sanitary pad was investigated, and the press said that those investigated products contain the certain chemical that are possibly harmful to human body. And those are investigated goods, and the other things is not investigated good. So first look at these. So let's only focus on the first law. Here, that one is looking at the changing revenue, and this one looking at the changing quantity. And as you can see, the coefficient for the invested product are all negative and significantly the statistically significant at a 1% level, which means that after the central pad incident, the revenue dropped sharply, and the quantity dropped sharply for the investigate product. So basically, the revenue, I mean, in detail, specifically the revenue and the quantity of the invested product decreased by 84.9% or 94.9% or 95.2%. So almost all the quantity and revenue dropped. It means it is a huge damage because of central pad incident to those firms who sell the invested product. But the others have no effect. For your quantity, doesn't have an effect because we never start over here. But for revenue increase, we have small over here. Right? So it means the revenue of non-investigative products. So almost all other products revenue is increased by 39.2% after the incident, but the volume did not change. If chemophobia triggered by the central pad incident had discouraged consumer demand, then if we think about the effect of this chemophobia, we should expect that the revenue and quantity should decrease, right? But here, this case here, we saw that the quantity doesn't change, but revenue increases. This is kind of counterintuitive. I mean, you can think of this kind of counterintuitive, and you can think about why that happens. So this is kind of opposite outcome to our expectation. Then we can guess why this happens. And here we notice that a central pad are necessary good. So humans need to use it anyway. So it's hard to reduce the overall consumption on central pad. But after the chemophobia, so central pad incident, they reacted by diversifying their consumption patterns in response to chemophobia. That was our guess. So to see the diversification effect, we did the same analysis for differentiated product. Here, the differentiated product is something can be distinguished with premium, organic, pure cotton, and natural. And all the others gonna be non-differentiated product or I would say the regular product. And then I look at I apply the techniques to analyze the effect of central pad. Here I distinguish the central pad. One is differentiated, the other is regular. As you can see, the regular product, the revenue doesn't changes, and quantity doesn't changes. But for differentiated product, the quantity does not change, but their revenue increases. So it means that they actually try to buy more for the differentiated good rather than the regular after the central pad incident. To see this effect a little more detail, I distinguish this. I make the subcategory for the differentiated product here: organic, premium, pure cotton, and natural. As you can see, this is the sales revenue, and after the central pad incident, those organic and premium products and pure cotton a little bit, their revenue increases. And also, if you look at the quantity and the organic and premium products, their quantity increases after the central pad incident. So it means that response to chemophobia, they change their consumption pattern from the regular product to the differentiated product, especially to is organic and premium product. So, in summary, so this is actually the end. In summary, this is result provide evidence that after the sanitary pad incident, consumer maintained the consumer did not change their consumption, the overall consumption for sanitary pads, but diversified their consumption toward a differentiated product, especially the premium or organic product, in response to can phobia. It means it implied that the consumer they came to perceive that the premium product or a little bit expensive one is as a safer product. So they shift their consumption to a more expensive product. And this extra spending because of this diversification would not happen if there is no sanitary pad incident. So we can think that this is kind of economic loss for consumer side. So they spend unnecessary expenditure. So in conclusion, our study showed that the king phobia not only causes direct effect to the firm producing the invested product, but also lead to socio-economic loss due to the unnecessary spending resulting from the diversification. This suggests that the impact of the economic impact of king phobia could be very huge and significant. So, the policymaker should think about how we can deal with this. So, there's a policy suggestion, but I don't think this is kind of interesting. So, basically, I think they need to establish a system to keep the response to king phobia, and they make this sort of the standardized test, or they can think about the change, they consider changing from positive regulation to negative regulation. They can think about this. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Professor Hong Woo-young. His excellent and very interesting study of some of the toxic issues, hazard issues with the sanitary pads for the women. It's very, very interesting story in Korea. I'm not sure about this kind of happening was in the other countries, but I remember in 2017, this issue is actually it comes from the chemical hazard issues from in the sanitary pad for the woman. But it increased and expanded this issue to another areas. Some inequality issues and some of the other issues like this, the economic loss or the unnecessary increasing of the social transaction costs. It's not good for our economy as well. I remember one of the very interesting experience for me. I was consulted by the KFDA and some of the other institution who please check and evaluate of the chemical hazard of the sanitary pads from the organic solvent in contained very little amount of the organic solvent in there. As you know, maybe some of the people in here, our colleagues, we used to the dry cleaning service for our clothes. So after dry cleaning service, some of the suit or some jacket, it contains of the organic solvent in there. More than 20 years or 30 years from that time, some of the chemicals, the toxicity has the comment about some of issues on the dry cleaning issues in the clothes. But it's not enough to make it to realize some of another intervention to prevent from the hazard from the dry cleaning like that. In this the chemical some of each hazard in the sanitary pad it's less loaded dry cleaning agent actually. So, but unfortunately, this issue is has becomes social issues because it contains of the for women and equality issues, inequality issues, and many things. Some of the chemical, economically poor families or ladies, they were very scared with that, but they could not buy, purchase for premium brand or organic free pad or the natural pad and the organic certified pad. They could not. They made complaint. It becomes a social issue, not the chemical hazard issue. After it becomes a social issue, we could not have that. We did not any kind of the scientific evidence of preparation. It was not useless for them. So that's the reason why the proper right, the communication is really needed for our society. So it's my first idea. The risk communication is very important before that time. Okay, so let's move to the second speaker. Second speaker is Ms. Sachi. She is coming from the Nepal. Now he is a researcher from the Department of Preventive Medicine and the Institute for Environmental Health of Korea University. She will make it the understanding of the risk perception of Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accidents treated radioactive wastewater release. Please.
Good morning, distinguished professionals, colleagues, participants. My name is Sachivarat Chitrakar and I'm from Nepal, and currently I'm a researcher at the Institute for Environmental Health in Korea University. I am honored to present my research today on public risk perception regarding the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accidents treated radioactive wastewater release, which is an evidence from South Korea. Thank you for having me. Let me start with something about the background of the research. In July 2023, the International Atomic Energy Agency confirms that the release of treated wastewater from the Fukushima Daiichi power plant will pose minimal risk to the human health and the environment. However, the public concern remained high, especially in South Korea, and our research tried to explore how the South Korean adults perceive the risk and estimate the key factors that influence their perceptions, such as subjective knowledge, perceived involuntary exposure, and so on. My presentation has the following context, background, methodology, results, and conclusion. So we can explore the background in three parts: international concerns, protests in South Korea, and response from the South Korean government. Adding to the issues, we would like to say that the neighboring countries, including South Korea, remained particularly concerned about the potential transboundary effects of the released wastewater. Many activists actually argued that the radioactive contaminants would still have the risk once they are released to the water, even if they are treated. And in response, the South Korean government has enhanced the regulatory testing of seafood and monitored the radiation levels. But despite all of this, the South Korean government did not oppose the Japan's decision, but the people's perception are still unknown. This is the objective of our research. We aim to explore the predictors of risk perception regarding the release of treated wastewater from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant among South Korean adults. We assess the psychological locations of various risk attributes, examined demographic characteristics, and also determined what kind of cognitive appraisals, factors, and socio-contextual factors were affecting the risk perception of people. Speaking about the data and methods, we conducted an online survey which included 1,000 South Korean adults from age 20 to 59 based on the population distribution, which was the distribution was by region, sex, age, according to the National Statistics Office. Next, we have the variables that we included in our research and the model. We accessed the socio-demographic variables, which included gender, age, education, household economic income, perceived health, and also political preference. Then we had psychological factors where we accessed how personal awareness of the dangers and harms regarding the radio wastewater affects people's perception. Next was how the people think that the radioactive treated water is it controllable by personal measures or not. And next we had if they think they are exposed to the radioactive wastewater unknowingly. And we also extended social contextual factors which checked on the reliability of government and institutions. In our case, we assessed the reliability of Korean and Japanese government, IAEA. We also assessed if the respondents think that the current government policies have economic benefit to the country and are based on scientific evidence or not. And lastly, we assessed the objective knowledge. Now we'll move on to the first result. We conducted a factorial analysis based on Slovak's psychometric paradigm, which included 11 common risks that people generally face in their daily lives. So as you can see in the graph, the upper y-axis is labeled as unknown risk, which is identified as risk and threats that are not well known to the public yet and hard to observe and new. And on the extreme right, on the x-axis, it was labeled as dread, meaning that people are scared and dreadful about those types of risks. And our analysis showed that the radioactive contaminated wastewater and radionuclide lied on the section of dread risk and was considered unknown, while the COVID-19 pandemic was actually on the area where people thought it was not dreadful and was known risk. We conducted a hierarchical multivariate analysis, and these are our results. We had conducted the analysis into 3 models, and in the final models that you can see that gender, age, psychological factors, socio-contextual factors, and economical and safety factors were found significant, and I will be discussing them further in the discussion part. So our research showed that gender differences and age factor existed in this research. The gender differences showed that women exhibited higher risk perception compared to men, and the age group from 30 to 39 had higher risk perception than the other age groups. We could say that these differences can come from the woman's intention, how women think that the perception is higher because they are more concerned over the health risks such as contaminated food and radiation-related risk. And in case of age, the age of 30 to 39 are mostly engaged in external activities and may also think that they have higher economic responsibilities, which makes them to perceive higher risk. So our study supports the existing literature on gender and risk perception. We could say that the research previous research has showed that men usually perceive less risk because they also see the economic benefits of nuclear plants and other factors. And women are found to usually perceive higher risk about various other environmental and health-related hazards, particularly radioactive contamination and also genetic risks. The other findings that were significant in our study was trust regarding the government. And this was quite interesting because it showed that if people had higher trust in the Korean government, they also had higher risk. And when they had lower trust in the Japanese government, it also reduces the risk perception. We could say that despite trusting the Korean government, higher trust correlates also with the anxiety and possibly due to the perceived lack of transparency in risk communication and how the government actually communicates with the people about all these risks. And previous research have also shown that political factors and changes in leadership and policy also affect how people perceive risk about these kind of environmental factors. And previous literature on the government and related institutions gave us some reasons about thinking why the trust in government could affect the risk perception. For example, trust in government enhances information-seeking behavior. So people might seek for more information when they think that the government is giving them better information and communicating a risk even better. And the previous research have shown that collaborative approaches also help to build some trust. So we should involve multiple sectors, including government agencies and also the local stakeholders, so that we can communicate risk better to the public. Now the next discussion point was the role of knowledge and awareness. Our results showed that higher risk perception of higher perceived knowledge, which is subjective awareness, is linked to higher risk perception. Even when the actual risk is low, individuals may overestimate threats based on their understanding. Individuals with awareness may experience heightened anxiety due to feeling more exposed to the potential dangers. And also risk communication should aim to align the public awareness with scientific evidence to prevent the inflated fears and ensure accurate understanding of the risk. Our study results were supported by the previous studies showing that higher subjective knowledge could increase risk perception, and some studies also showed some diverging results in the previous studies where it reported that a negative relationship between subjective knowledge and risk perception. One of the limitations of our study could be that we did not include the adolescents, who also are an important population line for the perception. So the future results, the future studies should include the adolescents in their research. Now I would like to move on to the recommendations that we have collected from our research. For the recommendations, we can derive policy recommendations, engagement with stakeholders, and enhancing the trust and communication to effectively address public concerns regarding the Fukushima wastewater release. We recommend several policy strategies. First, targeted communication should focus on the demographic concerns, as our research showed that women and younger adults were perceiving higher risk. By providing transparent, scientifically backed information, we can build trust and reduce public anxiety and clear communication with the public. Secondly, the engagement of stakeholders is also important when it comes to risk communication. The local communities like fishermen and other people who are more directly exposed or involved in the exposure to this wastewater should be included in the decision-making process, which will help to elevate their livelihood concerns and reduce the risk perception. Lastly, building trust requires a multi-sectoral approach. So collaboration between the government, private sectors, and community organizations is vital to promote transparency about the risk communication and scientific evidence. I would like to move on to the final takeaway message from our research. I would like to say that risk communication policies should focus on building public trust by addressing concerns like involuntary exposure and subjective knowledge, and also using two-way communication that involves local actors in understanding the public risk perception even better. And also the inclusive frameworks are very essential. Policy development should focus on creating inclusive risk communication frameworks that go beyond just one-way messaging and ensuring the public concern and needs are incorporated, particularly in the higher risk environments and higher risk population. Thank you.
So thank you, Ms. Hutchison. It's quite impressive and the very helpful the study about the another examples of the cases where a scientific evidence-based debate has been transformed into another political issue based on political interest in the political parties, essentially. And this tend to undermine the democracy and the scientific evidence-based discussion structure and this decision-making process as well. It's still ongoing. Just 1 month ago, some opposite party, the politician groups, has demonstrated in the fish market. Don't use, don't handle, or don't make it late with some of the fish from the imported from the Japan, like that. So that's the reason why we are here. We are the scientists. We always have to make this following the set evidence, not the political interest or not the political our dogmas. So let's make it better discussions, further discussion on these issues in the discuss session. So let's move to the third speaker, I. Okay, so good morning again, the distinguished colleagues and the fellow participants. I am Jeo Cho, the professor of the Korea University Department of Preventive Medicine and the director of the Institute for the Environmental Health and the president of NARS, National Academy of Health, Life and Society. As we gather to discuss the pressing issues of fake news and its impact on society, I'm excited to share insights on the global trend and the South Korean cases, the context of the South Korea, in regulating online content. This issue has become increasingly significant in our digital era, affecting public safety, trust in institutions, and even the integrity of democratic process. I hope this presentation sparks the meaningful discussion and help us collectively explore solutions to this challenge. In my presentation today will cover the following contents. The fake news or disinformation is intentionally the false information designed to deceive, while misinformation is incorrect information spread without the malicious intent. The key point, fake news or disinformation. Here are some of the differences in the definition of misinformation. According to some of the experts, or like Shetties and Boas, the fake news could be confused in various types. Disinformation, which is deliberately deceptive, and misinformation, which is unintentionally incorrect. Both forms can mislead the public, erode trust, and create confusion, especially in today's the fast-paced digital media landscape. So already have seen the global context of fake news. Here are some of the examples of the fake news on coronavirus during the last COVID-19 pandemic that spread during the pandemic. The coronavirus can be transmitted through the cardboard using in the FedEx. Maybe you can remember some of the cardboard in the virus could survive in for much longer time. That's the reason why that some of the country, some people, didn't want to get the FedEx like that. Even though the social lockdown was in there, without the FedEx or without such kind of service, they couldn't survive. Or some mosquito bites, the mosquito could spread to the COVID-19 virus into other people. It was fake news. There's a lot of the cases and examples about the fake news. The impact of the fake news extends across all regions, affecting democratic process and the social stability as well. So let's have a look at the safety regulation of the globally. Okay, so let me start with the German cases. The Germany's Network Information Act was introduced in 2017. This law requires the social media platform to remove illegal content within 24 hours with fines up to 50 million euros. It was start with the debating on some election campaign, and that some of the illegal, the fake news was very serious for the society, and especially on the election for some politicians as well. In 2018, France enacted the anti-fake news law in response to concerns over election periods as well. This law empowers the courts to swiftly block or remove content identified as fake news during the election periods, protecting the integrity and transparency of the democratic process in France. Singapore also they introduced the Prevention of Online Disinformation and Manipulation Act in 2019, especially regarding the ethnic tension and national security. They regarded the fake news issue as a national security. They adopted this one as kind of the security issue, the agenda in the country. And these the global, the global examples highlight the diverse approach taken by the countries to regulate the fake news while balancing the freedom of the press. The South Korea, facing similar challenge, has drawn from these global trends to develop its own regulation, aiming to safeguard public trust and maintain social stability. In 2017, one of the survey revealed that 84% of South Koreans are concerned about the fake news prevalence. The research by the Yang Seung-hae, and she identified 7,800 people's fake news articles between 2016 and 2018. It's been quite big numbers. Predominantly, these fake news relate to the party issue. Additionally, misinformation can have very big consequences, as seen in Iran, where false claim about the COVID-19 treatment resulted in thousands of positive cases and many people were died. When we look at the penalty regulation, you look at China, there's serious imprisonment of 15 years about the fake news followed by Singapore. So the provision of the rigor, the response to fake news in our countries, is briefly into this about the issues. The Korea Communications Commission has the authority to order information and the communication service providers to refuse, suspend, or restrict the processing of certain types of information after deliberation by the deliberation committees. However, this is fact. It's a reality. However, for specific information types, the Commission cannot take action if the affected the individual explicitly express their will against such measure. If they do that, if they make a big point, the Commission could not have any kind of the proper the management about that. So it's that's the reason why the balancing issue is really important, because the right of the press, the freedom of the press is important. We understand that, but some of the issues, for especially the fake news, we need another proper countermeasures. South Korea also has acted the imprisonment up to 7 years and fines up to 50 million Korean won. It's not a big money. It's not some of the burden for the portals or company. They did not have any concern about some of this kind of money penalty. In the South Korea, the parliament, during the 2020 National Assembly, a total of 43 bills related to fake news were proposed. However, just only 2 bills was finally passed and adopted by the parliament. So one of these two was the Special Act on the Punishment of Sexual Violence Crimes, and another one is Act on Promotion of Information Communication Network, Utilization and Information Protection. On the September of last year, the Congressman Yoon and others proposed an amendment to the Information and Communication Network Act that would add must take immediate actions upon the receiving deletion request for this information. But it's not on the reviewing and making the negotiating with the two parties. I'm not sure this new amendment could pass finally. I'm not sure that right now. So let's have a look at on the people's opinions on fake news and disinformation. The 2024 January this year, the survey by the East Asian Institute, they found that 44% of the respondents in South Korea had encountered fake news in the past 6 months, with 60% of the such experience is through the internet, mostly the portals and social media. The same research also revealed that 80% agree that the regulation should not be implemented, as it can hinder freedom of press. This is in another way, this is very significant result, given that the 58% of the public has begun to accept the need to regulate the fake news. So mostly 58%, they wanted to make it some of the countermeasure to fake news in our society. It can be seen that people agreed for most of the countermeasure, with over 60 to 70% responding as yes, like this. So how can the main stakeholder play the role? In South Korea, the stakeholders have different points of views on fake news regulation. The political party and opposite party, they have different positions. So let's have a look at the review later for your reference in later. I will skip. And also, there are various forms of countermeasures against the false and manipulated information. Nevertheless, the government has to play the key role in delivering this safely, and the stakeholders must support this kind of issue. But I want to emphasize to the self-regulations and the fact-checking and literacy education should be one of becomes the main roles and the strategy to handle the fake news in our society. And usually this kind of the strategy should be covered by the not only government but also in the public society and professional group like ours, like here. The scientists and toxicologists and risk communication professional should be involved in this kind of the fact checking and the self-regulation and literacy education public. It should be increased. It should be more importance on these issues as well. So, what about the economic point of view on the fake news? The economic cost of the fake news, the loss, was largest on stock market losses and volatility, $39 billion annually to the report. The fake news on social media is a significant societal issue with negative economic impact, as misinformation acts as a harmful externality. The content moderations and fact-checking are viewed public goods. However, that the regulating fake news will remain very difficult due to challenges in the misinformation and risk of the costly government investigation is big shot, so big issue. So a multifaceted regulatory approach to combine rigor and economic strategies is essential to address the economic impact of fake news more effectively. The fake news is, as I said, the negative externality. The fake news presents a significant challenge. The negative externality, imposing hidden the cost of public health, politics, and safety that social media platforms do not offer. The fact-checking and the content moderation are essential public goods that are not directly profitable, meaning that the markets often fails to provide them adequately, requiring state intervention. Furthermore, the strong financial incentive for creating the fake news, such as the ad revenue with minimal consequences, highlights that the need for regulation to correct this market failure and ensure responsible information distribution. Addressing the fake news requires a balanced approach. They combine direct regulation for severe cases, like during the election campaign, with the property and the liability laws for clear individual harms. A key recommendation is implementing a Pigunia tax system, the Pigunia tax system on social media platform to internalize the cost of the fake news by themselves, the funding fact-checking, media literacy, and victim compensations while fostering a healthy digital environment. So I wanted to talk about some of the strategy on to handle fake news. It's just my opinion. The approach, the promoting literacy, digital literacy is essential for consuming information wisely among the public, and it should include key skills like data comprehension, source evaluations, and understanding the social, economic, and cultural context of the society. To be effective, the literacy education must be tailored on societal realities, with special emphasis on the understanding of datafication and the social cultural background of the region. To just be broad, research talked about some of the risk perception issues on Daiji, the treated wastewater. The 30 to 40 women are very sensitive and very has very high risk perception. Yes, it's a very common findings of the similar risk perception study. Not only the Daiji, but also climate change, everything. Most of the public risk perception very sensitive to the 30 to 40 women. You see, naturally. Because the woman, especially in that age, they have to care of their baby. think family. That's the reason why they have a very sensitive to the issues. So, like this, the tailored and customized risk perception approach and techniques should be adapted to the right and proper management of the risk communications. So, as I said before many times, the fake news is a complex issue that requires the multi-percent or combination of legal, technological, and educational strategy for effective management. The article emphasized the importance of the legal regulations, highlight the role of the AI in detecting misinformation, and advocates for enhanced media literacy to empower the peoples, individuals, and institutions in controlling the spread to the fake news. By adopting this kind of the mixed approach of state intervention, financial incentives, and partnership with South Korea can create a more resilient framework for combating the fake news that is well suited to its regulatory environment and digital landscape. So hopefully, yeah. So there's something I want to emphasize. For past 20 years, we have been working with the Korean Press Association, the Broadcasting Association, and Science, the Journalists Association, and the Korean Medical Association together to create a voluntary guideline or standard for the media to prevent the provision of fake news or incorrect information. One of the examples of them is include the establishment and use of standard for reporting on suicide, and reporting on infectious disease, and reporting on the toxicity of household chemical product. And so this articles aims to identify the effective policy response to combat the rising issue of fake news in South Korea, especially in the light of the recent instance. We would like to emphasize the strengthening of the autonomous, voluntary, scientific, and evidence-based reporting standard, and the strengthening of fact-checking and issue management in cooperation with the professional organizations such as the Korean Medical Association or Korean Toxicology Association or some such the scientist group or NARS like us. We believe that this will be one of the desirable examples of the PPP, public-private partnership, and the mechanism for public-private and business sector to win-win together in the future. Thank you very much.